The old man leaned closer to the fire, his voice cracked and low like driftwood snapping in flame. Children gathered around him, some half asleep, others wide-eyed. The wind outside howled through the cracks of the old hut, but no one dared speak. Not while he was telling it. "Listen now," he began, tapping the ashes of his pipe onto the floor. "You must remember this. The sea is not just water. It's not just salt and fish and boats. It remembers things. Things people forget. It keeps count. And once every 100 years it speaks." The children shuffled closer. The flames danced on their cheeks. "They call it the pearl tide. Comes without warning. The sea turns black like ink and the sky forgets the sun. Then come the pearls, white as bone, smooth as lies. They wash up in thousands. They roll between your toes like marbles from a dead man's bag." He paused, letting the image sit heavy in their minds. "They're not treasure. No, there's something else. Each pearl, they say, is born from a broken promise. A vow snapped like a fishing line. A lie told under the moon. They grow inside the sea, feeding on pain and silence. The souls of the betrayed, twisted into beauty." A girl near the fire, no older than 8, wrapped her arms around her knees. Her eyes never left the firelight. "People take them, of course," the old man went on. "They always do. Greedy hands never stop to ask where a thing came from. They string them into necklaces, sell them to kings, trade them for goats and salt and silver. But the sea remembers." He leaned forward now. His voice dropped to a whisper. "First come the whispers. You think it's just wind, just waves. But it's voices. Crying, begging, screaming. They come from the pearls. Or maybe from what's inside them." The fire cracked sharply. Someone flinched. "The legends say there are spirits in the sea, women with bones made of coral and eyes like tidipools. The shell-bound spirits they're called. Daughters of the deep. They once lived above the water long ago, but were betrayed by those they loved. Fathers, lovers, sisters, sold, drowned, forgotten." He gestured to the doorway beyond which the sea slept in the dark. "Now they wait in the deep, pulling at tides. They gather every vow broken near the water and twist it into a pearl. And when the pearl tide rises, they send those pearls back to shore as reminders. Warnings. Maybe even bait." One of the boys raised a shaky hand. "But what happens if someone takes them?" The old man smiled. Not kindly. "They hear the scream," he said. "Not right away. But in time. In the middle of the night or at their wedding or on a calm, sunny day at sea. The pearls crack. And the scream comes out. Loud. Terrible. Like someone being torn apart underwater. That's the price." He shifted in his seat, the wood creaking under his weight. "There was once a woman. No, a girl. Quiet thing born during a moonless tide. They say her stepmother sold her for a sack of these cursed pearls. Thought she could cheat the sea. Thought a life could be traded for treasure." The children held their breath. "But the girl came back," the old man whispered. "Not with pearls. With shells. Shells that screamed louder than any sea storm." He stood slowly and poked the fire. Sparks rose like ghosts. "That's not my story to tell. That one is coming. But remember this, all of you." He looked around the circle, his eyes sharp despite his age. "If you sell the sea what is not yours, it will come back for what is." Outside, the wind quieted for a moment. The hut fell into silence. Then in the distance, a wave crashed harder than usual against the rocks. The old man sat back down and folded his hands. "And this is the village where it all began," he said, his voice soft now. "A village where the sea never truly sleeps. Where the sand is white as bone, and the gods beneath the waves still listen." The fire burned low. No one spoke again until morning. They said the night Marna was born, the moon forgot to rise. No stars. No light. Just black sky stretching over black water, the sea so still it looked carved from stone. The tide had gone quiet, unnaturally quiet, and the waves didn't move as if they too were holding their breath. The old women of the village took it as a sign. A bad one. A moonless tide had come. Marna's mother died giving birth, her final breath drawn in just as the tide pulled back. Her father, a soft-spoken fisherman named Corin, wrapped the newborn girl in seal hide and carried her down to the sea's edge. He placed her gently on a flat rock as the custom demanded, to see if the ocean would claim her. It didn't. The sea only lapped once, touched her tiny foot and then stilled again. Some thought that meant she was blessed. Others weren't so sure. Corin tried to raise her alone and for a short time she knew warmth. He sang to her with a voice like wind through reeds and carved her toys from driftwood. But even the sea loves what it takes. One morning his boat was found washed up on the rocks, split down the middle like a cracked egg. No body. No blood. Just a single pearl rolling back and forth across the splintered wood. The village whispered, the sea took him in payment. After that, Marna was given to Vela, Corin's widow from a union before. Vela was not a woman who softened, not even for children. She kept her hair in tight braids and her mouth tighter. She spoke to Marna only when necessary and then only to scold. "You're not mine," she would hiss, "and you never will be." Marna didn't cry. Not once. She simply grew quiet and watchful, like moss on cold stone. She barely spoke. Not because she couldn't, but because she didn't see the point. The only voices she trusted were the ones that came from the sea. She would take the long path to the shoreline every day after chores and sit alone for hours, digging in the sand, stacking stones and gathering shells. Not the shiny ones tourists might take. She liked the chipped ones, the broken, the strange. Ones with odd spirals and shadowed holes. She would press them to her ear and close her eyes. That's when she heard it. Whispers. Not words exactly, but something like them. A murmur of memory. A breath of sorrow. Sometimes it felt like the shell was singing to her. Other times, it trembled like it was trying to remember how to scream. She never told anyone. They wouldn't understand. At home, Vela sneered at the shells Marna brought back. Once, she threw a whole pile of them into the fire, muttering that the girl was cursed. Marna only waited until the fire died down, then picked through the ashes for what hadn't burned. She built little altars along the coast, half-shrines made from seaweed, bone, and driftwood. She tucked bits of cloth inside them, shaped them like mouths or eyes or hands. People in the village began avoiding those parts of the beach. Said it gave them chills. As Marna grew, so did the stories. Did you hear she talks to the sea? I heard she never blinks. Her mother was taken by the tide and her father too. What else could she be? Some said she was a sea spirit hiding in human skin. Others claimed she'd been touched by the shell-bound sisters, and that one day she'd vanish into the waves without leaving footprints. The older villagers watched her with caution. The younger ones watched her with curiosity. But none of them really saw her. Marna didn't mind. The sea didn't ask questions. The shells didn't lie. She didn't need to be seen, only left alone. But word spreads fast in small places. And where there are whispers, there's always someone listening with more greed than sense. Someone who doesn't believe in curses. Someone who sees a quiet girl by the sea and thinks, maybe she's worth something. And so the story of Marna, the moonless daughter, began to slip from tale into truth. A girl not made for land. A girl with the sea in her bones. And in time someone would try to sell her. But they'd forget one thing. The sea doesn't forget. The house had grown colder that year. The wind slipped through the shutters like a thief. The woodpile was low, the pantry nearly empty. Vela no longer bothered hiding her hunger or her bitterness. Her cheeks had thinned, her fingers were cracked, and her eyes had taken on the sharpness of someone watching the world for a weakness to exploit. And Marna? She moved through the silence like smoke, doing her chores, tending the shore, never complaining. But her silence was not the silence of obedience, it was something else. Something that unnerved Vela more with each passing day. The pearl tide was near. The villagers could feel it in their bones. The ocean had turned heavy, thick with quiet. Fish vanished from the nets. The gulls flew inland. People whispered again, not just about Marna but about omens. About treasure. About curses. When the pearl tide came, pearls would follow, if you were brave or foolish enough to reach for them. And now strangers had begun to arrive. Tall ships with painted sails dropped anchor in the bay. Traders, charm seekers, and old money men with silver rings and greedy eyes walked the village paths asking questions. Buying charms. Offering coins for secrets. The village, once slow and sleepy, buzzed with a nervous edge. Vela saw an opportunity. She told them Marna had power. That she had been born under the moonless tide and had never cried once, not even as a baby. That she could hear the sea whispering through shells. That she could walk into the tide and bring back pearls clutched in her fists. She told it with such steady eyes that even those who doubted began to wonder. One afternoon a man came. His name was Corin. He wore a coat made of some sea-dark fabric, and his boots left no tracks. He didn't speak much, but his presence pressed into the house like fog. He listened to Vela's story with polite silence, then pulled a pouch from beneath his cloak. When he opened it, pearls spilled into his palm, perfect, round, glistening. Pale like milk, yet cold as moonlight. Vela stared. She didn't blink. For the girl, he said simply. I'll take her when the tide is highest. Marna stood in the doorway quiet as always. She didn't run, didn't protest. But her eyes, those still water eyes, met Vela's, and for the first time they held something sharp. Not fear. Not sadness. Something deeper. A knowing. Vela didn't hesitate. She took the pearls with a trembling hand and spat into her palm to seal the deal. Corin did the same. The pouch disappeared into Vela's pocket like it had always belonged there. That night the house was still. Vela tucked the pearls beneath her pillow and dreamt of gold-laced dresses and grand halls where she would walk clean and unburdened. In her dream, she wore a necklace of pearls so long it reached the floor. People bowed as she passed. But the dream shifted. A sound began, low at first like wind through cracks. Then louder. A whisper, a whimper, a wail. The pearls began to move beneath her pillow. She jolted awake. Nothing. She reached under the pillow. The pouch was still there. But it was warm. As if it had been breathing. She clutched it tighter. Just sea wind, she muttered. Just dreams. Downstairs Marna packed nothing. She carried only one shell in her hand. It had a spiral broken off, but it hummed faintly when her thumb touched the edge. At dawn Corin returned. No cart. No escort. Just a single boat with black sails bobbing at the edge of the dock. Marna walked behind him without being told. The villagers watched from behind shutters. No one stopped them. No one asked questions. There was something in the air, thick and wrong, like the sea had pulled the sky too close to the earth. As Marna stepped into the boat, she turned back once, not to plead, not to cry, but to look. At the house. At Vela. Their eyes met across the distance. Vela stood in the doorway, the pouch of pearls clutched to her chest like a child. She looked thinner than ever. Smaller. And though no words passed between them, something moved through the air. A thread, invisible but tight. Something pulled. Something snapped. The boat drifted away with the tide, silent but sure. And upstairs, in that dim little house by the sea, the pearls began to whisper again. This time Vela listened. The boat left without a word. No farewell, no look back. Just black sails fading into fog, swallowed by the sea as if they had never been. Marna stood on the shore, the sand cold and sharp beneath her feet. The air here tasted different, briny, thick, almost like breath held too long. Around her stretched the drowned isles, a scattered chain of land left behind by gods or forgotten storms. No homes. No voices. Only ruins. Here the sea had carved its memory into stone. Crumbled idols leaned at crooked angles, their faces worn smooth by salt and time. Some had mouths full of barnacles as if still trying to speak. Others held empty bowls in their laps, waiting for offerings long since washed away. Marna walked between them like a shadow, her eyes calm, her feet quiet. She passed fishbone shrines tied with kelp and rotted cloth. Some had bones still fresh, tangled with dried blood. Others were cracked wide open, hollow and forgotten. The tidipools between the rocks shimmered with strange reflections, some of them not hers. It was a place meant for leaving people behind. Punishments happened here, the old stories said. Sailors left to drown slow. Wives accused of sea witching. Children born wrong or whispered about. It was a place for silencing. But Marna didn't fear it. She had already been left behind once. The days blurred. She survived on seaweed and limpets. She drank rainwater caught in carved stones. Her clothes grew ragged, her skin pale. But she lived. And she listened. Always she listened. The shells here were buried deep, wedged under rocks, tangled in roots, hiding beneath bones. She dug them out one by one, washing them gently in the tide before holding them to her ear. Some hummed. Others trembled faintly, like something inside was still afraid. She spoke to them softly. Not in words but in feeling. And they began to respond. The island didn't feel empty after that. Time folded strangely here. The moon rose wrong and sometimes the sun set twice in a day. Shadows moved backward. The tide pulled in before it pushed out. Sometimes, from the corners of her eye, Marna saw figures, thin and translucent, walking where no one should walk. But they left her alone. Maybe they knew she didn't belong to the living world anymore either. One evening, while digging near a cracked altar, her fingers touched something smooth, larger than any shell she had found before. She pulled it free from the sand. It was the size of her palm, shaped like a spiral coiled in on itself. Deep blue with streaks of gray, and colder than anything she'd ever held. It vibrated when she touched it. She lifted it to her ear. At first nothing. Then a breath. A voice, barely above silence, pressed between the layers of the shell. Who hears me? Marna didn't answer. She simply listened. The shell pulsed again. Not with sound but feeling, anger buried deep, old and heavy, coiled like the spiral of the shell itself. I am Iskith, it said. The voice clearer now. Feminine. What? I was drowned. Betrayed. Forgotten. Marna sat on the wet sand and held the shell tight. You're like me, the voice whispered. Left. Soul. Blamed for things you never asked for. But you lived. I didn't. That means you can carry me. Marna nodded once, slow and steady. The shell warmed in her hand. You can hear them, can't you? Iskith said. The others. The broken. The hushed. They're here, scattered like driftwood. You can gather them. Let them be remembered. Let them speak. The tide rose around her feet, but Marna didn't move. The shell began to glow faintly in the fading light. You don't have to be quiet anymore, Iskith said. You can become something more. The sea doesn't forget. And neither should you. And just like that, Marna changed. Not in a way the eye could see. Her face stayed the same. Her silence stayed too, but it was no longer empty. It was full now. Full of voices. Of stories. Of screams not yet released. She tucked the shell into a pouch and stood. The island hadn't become warmer. The wind still cut like knives. But she stood straighter now. Her eyes held something new. She was no longer just a girl lost to the tide. She was a vessel now. And the sea was not done speaking. The first shell came to her as if it had been waiting. It was pale pink, soft-looking but sharp along the edge, half buried beneath a tangle of seaweed near a broken idol. When Marna lifted it to her ear, the wind seemed to pause. Then the voice came, not in words at first but in gasps like someone breathing through salt water. He held me under, the voice said. He kissed me before he did it. The shell shook in her palm. She didn't flinch. She sat on the sand, cross-legged, and let the voice pour out. The woman inside the shell had once lived in a fishing village not unlike Marna's own. Her husband had grown jealous. Of her laughter. Of her beauty. Of the way others looked at her. So one morning he took her out past the reef and never brought her back. The village said she must have slipped. But the sea remembered. It wrapped her final breath in calcium and silence and let it harden into a shell. Marna cleaned the shell with water from her cupped hand, then wrapped it in a scrap of her own sleeve and tied it to her belt. The second came a few days later, wedged into the ribs of a dead seabird. It was small. Black and ridged. Sharp as teeth. When she listened, the voice was younger, broken, tired. They left me by the rocks. Said the god would bring fish if I didn't cry. The child had been given as an offering. A boy no older than 5, tied to a pole and left for the sea to claim. The god of course never came. But the sea did. And it took him gently. Quietly. Like it always did. Marna held the shell to her chest. The cold from it spread through her ribs, down to her spine. She whispered a lullaby her father used to hum. Nothing special, just soft. The shell grew warmer in her hand. She tied it next to the first. The third shell was jagged. Bright white, splashed with red coral stains. It sat in the center of a shattered shrine, resting on what looked like a jawbone. This voice hissed. He said it would only be one night. That they'd pay well. That I'd come back. She didn't come back. Her brother had handed her to raiders for a pouch of silver and a new fishing net. They took her across the sea. She never saw home again. Marna didn't cry. Not even once. But something changed in her eyes. A sharpness. A storm pulling itself inward. She didn't keep the shell at her belt this time. She took a strand of seagrass and tied it across her shoulder. Then another across her chest. And one by one she stitched the shells together, delicate knots, tight and careful. The voices didn't fight each other. They hummed. Like they recognized one another. Like they'd been waiting. It wasn't long before she had enough to make a cloak. It wasn't made from cloth. Just shells and cords and thin ribbons of bone. Some large. Some small. Some smooth. Some cracked. Each one told its story to her. Each one gave her something in return. An image, a song, a final word. The cloak grew heavier with each voice. And warmer. She began to wear it during the night, walking the shore as the tide crept in. The cloak didn't hang still, it moved. Breathed. The shells clicked softly against each other like teeth in thought. Marna began to hum old sea rhymes. Ones she barely remembered. Ones no one taught her. The words came from deep in her belly, older than her bones. She sang in the tongue of drowned women. The rhythm of it made the cloak tighten, pulse. And the shells listened. One night, just as the moon crested over the eastern rise, she felt the scream building. It wasn't hers, but it moved through her like thunder through a cliff. The shells guided her. They taught her how to open her throat not for speech but for power. Not a sound of fear or pain, but something ancient. A force. When she screamed, it came out low and full and cracked the air. Birds flew from trees. The tide recoiled. Rocks split. It wasn't just a scream. It was truth unchained. That night, she stood on the tallest stone and let the sea hear her. Not a girl anymore. Not forgotten. The shells whispered her name like prayer, like warning. Marna Shellbearer. The sea had given her voices. Now she would use them. The sea had been restless for days. Waves thrashed harder against the rocks. Gulls circled inland, screeching warnings no one understood. The sky dimmed even in daylight and fishermen refused to leave shore. Everyone in the village knew what was coming, though no one dared name it aloud. The pearl tide had returned. And with it, something else rose from the deep. No one saw the moment she stepped onto the shore. One moment, the beach was empty. The next, she was there, standing where the foam met the sand, tall and still and terrible in her silence. Marna. But not the Marna they had known. Her skin was the pale gray of sea glass, smooth but weathered. Her hair clung to her shoulders like black seaweed, tangled with salt and bone. And the cloak, oh the cloak, it dragged behind her like a living shadow. Shells of every size clinked softly with each step. Some hummed. Some pulsed. Some whispered. Every few seconds one of them let out a low, wet sound. Not quite a scream. Not quite a sob. Something in between. Something full of memory and warning. She walked without rush. Without fear. Just one step at a time toward the village that had once turned its back. Those who saw her first didn't know what they were seeing. A child playing by the dunes froze, eyes wide. A dog barked once and then whimpered, tail tucked, running the other way. An old man dropped his net and backed away, whispering the name under his breath like it might burn his tongue. Marna. Word spread faster than fire. Windows slammed shut. Doors bolted. But it didn't matter. The air had changed. Heavier. Wetter. Like the sea had followed her, folding over rooftops and creeping into lungs. At Vela's house, the celebration had just begun. The pearl tide had brought its treasures again, and Vela had been waiting. Dressed in blue velvet with her gray hair pinned high, she held court like a queen among fools. Pearls draped around her neck, looped around her wrists, hanging from her ears. On her table, a goblet filled with wine and fresh pearls glittered like stars stolen from the sky. She laughed too loud. Too long. But beneath her smile, her fingers twitched. Something felt wrong. Then came the scream. It was distant, but sharp enough to crack the edge of her mirror. The sound passed through walls, through bone, through memory. Vela gasped. Her goblet slipped. The pearls inside spilled to the floor. They scattered in every direction, rolling, bouncing, clicking like teeth. The guests went silent. Outside, the tide pools froze. Not in ice but in time. Frogs stopped mid-hop. Crabs curled into their shells. The waves halted mid-crash and just hung there, suspended in breathless dread. Children cried in their sleep. The doors burst open. Marna stood on the threshold, soaked in sea light. Her cloak trailed behind her like a storm cloud stitched from grief. The shells screamed now, some in voices, some in raw sound. Each cry carried weight, history, names. Vela backed away one step at a time, her face pale as bone. You, she breathed. You should be. Marna raised her hand. Not to strike. Just to silence. Her voice, when it came, was not her own. It echoed like a tomb half-flooded, like a cave remembering a lost prayer. You sold me. The words didn't shout. They didn't need to. You took what wasn't yours, she said again, and the shells howled. One by one they called out. Names. Places. Sins. The room shook. Pearls cracked open on the floor, splitting like eggshells to reveal black cores. Vela fell to her knees, clutching the arms of her chair like it could save her. Please, she begged. I didn't know, I didn't mean. You knew, Marna said. And you didn't care. The shells rose from her cloak now, hovering slightly, circling the room like birds of prey. Every whisper turned to wailing. The guests fled, stumbling over each other in their panic. Some couldn't bear the sound. Some couldn't bear the shame. Marna stepped closer. Vela sobbed, her hands pressed to her ears. But the sound didn't come from the outside anymore. It was inside her now. In her head. In her chest. The shells screamed her guilt back at her. One final scream burst through the house, so sharp it shattered glass and snuffed every candle in the room. Then silence. When the villagers dared to return, the house was empty. Pearls lay cracked across the floor, gray and hollow. No sign of Vela. No footprints on the sand. Just the cloak lying neatly folded on the threshold, soaked with salt and memory. And in the distance, the sea whispered again. She was no longer just a girl. She was vengeance, and she had returned. Morning broke without birdsong. Clouds hung low, heavy and slow, like they'd been pulled down by something waiting underneath. The village square, normally full of chatter and clatter, stood still. Doors creaked open as whispers passed from house to house. She's calling us. One by one they came. Not with joy. Not with curiosity. But drawn like driftwood to tide. Farmers with cracked hands, fishermen still smelling of brine, old women with prayer beads clenched tight. Even children clung to skirts and sleeves, wide-eyed and silent. In the center of the square Marna stood. Barefoot. Cloaked in shells. The cloak no longer dragged behind her. It moved with her, alive with breath and rhythm. The shells clicked and murmured, hissing names in languages no longer spoken. Each one vibrated with pressure, like a storm about to break. When everyone had gathered, she didn't speak. She simply stepped forward and untied the cords. The shells fell from her shoulders like rain. They scattered across the stone, each one finding its place without her guiding hand. Some rolled to the feet of the crowd. Some settled into cracks. Some floated just slightly above the ground. Then one by one they opened. The sound that followed was not of wind or wave. It was human. Raw. Unbearable. Cries rose from the shells, voices from long ago. Not all were loud. Some wept softly. Others begged. A few laughed, hollow and broken. But each one told a truth. A man gasped and dropped to his knees when he heard a voice call his grandfather's name. He took her for trade, the voice moaned. Said she'd be better off with strangers than starving. But she never saw home again. A woman clutched her chest as a shell at her feet whispered. You knew he beat her. You heard it through the wall. You said nothing. You let her drown in silence. The villagers began to tremble. Not from cold but recognition. The shells didn't lie. Each one reflected a truth long buried. Deeds done in darkness. Silences that had cost lives. Old betrayals handed down like heirlooms. Marna didn't move. She didn't need to. The voices spoke for her. Then Vela arrived. Late. Dressed in finery, rings, pearls, stiff lace gloves. She pushed through the crowd like she still mattered. Like she still ruled. She opened her mouth to speak. Lies, she began. But the shells screamed over her. All of them at once. A chorus of fury. The sound split the air like a storm. Windows cracked. A tree near the well split down the center. People covered their ears and dropped to the ground. But not Marna. She stepped closer to Vela, calm and steady, her eyes reflecting sea glass. Vela backed away. I raised you, she shouted. I fed you. You were nothing, nothing without me. Marna said nothing. Then the air around the shells began to shift. Thicken. A chill spread out in a ring from the center of the square. The light dimmed as if the sun itself had ducked behind the horizon. From the cloak, still lying open behind Marna, something rose. Not a body. Not quite a face. A presence made of salt and shadow and memory. The sea oracle. Iska. She shimmered like heat on stone, tall and robed in kelp and bone. Her hair moved like it was always underwater. Her voice, when it came, was layered, like several women speaking at once. Judgment has been called. Vela tried to turn, but the crowd had shifted away from her. You sold blood for treasure. You fed the sea what it did not ask for. No, Vela whispered. No, I didn't know. The oracle raised a hand. The pearls around Vela's neck and wrists began to glow. Then they moved. They writhed like worms. Like eels. They slithered off her body, dropping to the ground and twisting into thin, shining cords. A net began to form, knotting itself around her ankles, her arms pulling tight. She screamed. But the village only watched. The sea had begun to rise. Not in waves, but in a path. Water crept up the stone streets, winding toward the square like a hand reaching. The shells chanted now, low and steady. The net of pearls dragged Vela toward the shore. She clawed at the ground. No one helped her. No one spoke. She reached for Marna. But Marna stepped back. The tide met them at the edge of the square. And swallowed Vela whole. One last scream echoed off the cliffs. Then stillness. The water receded. The pearls, once bright and gleaming, lay dull and cracked on the sand. Marna gathered her cloak. The shells, quiet now, closed themselves. Justice had been served. And the sea had spoken. That night the village held its breath. No torches were lit. No bells rang. Even the dogs curled in silence, noses tucked beneath their tails. The air tasted of salt and smoke, and though the tide had drawn back, its memory lingered in puddles and the glistening streets. Marna walked alone. The shells on her cloak were quiet now, no screams, no sobs, only a soft hum that rose and fell like the breath of the sea. With every step, water pooled behind her, then disappeared as if the earth itself was afraid to hold her too long. She didn't look at the houses she passed. She didn't need to. She knew them all, had watched them from the edge for years, always outside the circle, always the strange girl with wet hair and listening eyes. Now the shutters stayed shut. No faces peered through cracks. They were watching but from behind walls. And for once she didn't feel small beneath their gaze. She came to her old home. The door was ajar. Not kicked in, not forced, just open as if the house had been waiting. Inside, dust hung in the air like breath. The fire was long dead. The walls creaked softly like someone turning over in sleep. Marna stepped over the threshold. She didn't light a candle. Didn't need to. The moon, high above, lit the room just enough to remember it. The table was still there, crooked as ever. The chair Vela used to sit in had split down the back. Her father's old fishing net hung in the corner, mended one too many times. On the shelf, a tiny carved seal, a toy he'd made her, lay face down beneath a sheet of dust. She picked it up, held it for a moment, then placed it gently back. No ghosts greeted her, but the walls breathed around her, slow and deep, like lungs remembering a lullaby. She didn't cry. She had no more tears for this place. Before she left, she reached into her cloak. From the folds she drew one last shell. It was small, smooth, not cracked or haunted. Just pale gray, shaped like a crescent moon. She knelt at the doorway and placed it on the threshold, just beside the worn step where she used to sit with bare feet and watch the tide. The shell began to hum. Not loud. Just enough. A note that vibrated through the wood, through the stone, through the quiet. A song without words. A memory of what was. A hope for what might still be. Then she rose and walked away. No one saw her leave. In the morning the villagers crept out one by one. The sky was clear for the first time in days. The tide had receded far beyond the usual line, leaving sea glass and bones tangled in the reeds. Birds sang again, softly like they too were waiting. They found the shell on the step. It wasn't warm but it pulsed faintly when touched. Some heard a lullaby in its hum. Others heard a name. No one moved it. No one dared. Marna was gone. No footprints on the road. No sign of boat or cart. Some claimed she returned to the drowned isles, where time folded like titapools and shells grew teeth. Others whispered she'd become something else, a guardian of the tide, a spirit bound to the sea. There were stories after that. Of girls lost in storms who found their way back after hearing a hum in the wind. Of pearls that cracked open not with screams but with light. Of a cloaked figure walking the shore at dusk, shells swaying like wind chimes, eyes like water's edge at night. She had no shrine, no grave, just the shell. Humming always. The villagers never spoke of what had happened in the square. But they changed. No more pearl deals. No more offerings to false gods. The altars Marna had built from driftwood and bone were tended now, not avoided. Children left small gifts, bits of ribbon, smooth stones, hairpins rusted with sea salt. The sea remained quiet. But not silent. It listened now. And when it whispered, the villagers listened back. As for Marna, she became a name passed from mother to daughter, from sailor to lost soul. If the tide turns and your voice is unheard, they'd say, listen for the shell that hums. She hears. She remembers. And in the hush before storms, if you held still long enough, you might hear it too. A single note. Oh, soft. Eternal. The sea never stays still for long. Years passed like waves, pulling away the old, carrying in the new. Children were born. Elders were buried. The village learned to speak softer, to take only what was needed, to glance over shoulders when the wind shifted strangely from the shore. But memory is a tide too. And like all tides it returns. One summer evening, long after the village had stopped fearing the dark, a little girl sat at her grandmother's knee beside the hearth, tracing circles into the dirt floor with a driftwood stick. The fire crackled, the fish stew steamed gently, and the night outside leaned against the windows like a listening thing. Tell me the one about the shells, the girl whispered. The old woman nodded, her eyes clouded by age but still sharp enough to pierce the past. They say, she began, voice low and slow, there once was a girl born without a moon. The sea claimed her parents and the village forgot to love her. But she listened to the shells, and the shells listened back. The girl's eyes grew wide. She walked into the ocean wearing silence, the grandmother continued, and came back wrapped in screaming. She judged the liars, broke the bargains, made the sea remember what it had taken. And then, the girl asked, breath held like a pearl in her chest. She left a shell on a doorstep, and disappeared. The girl didn't sleep much that night. She kept picturing the cloak, the shells, the scream that broke the sky. The next morning, before dawn cracked the horizon, she slipped away with bare feet and a borrowed cloak. She walked the tide line alone, eyes scanning the wet sand. Most of the shells she found were broken or empty. Some hummed faintly like they were remembering something. She kept walking, wind tugging her hair, waves licking at her ankles. Then near the base of an old sea-warp shrine she saw it. A shell the size of her hand. Smooth. Dark gray with a single silver line spiraling from tip to edge. She picked it up. And it said her name. Not loud. Not sharp. Just enough. Her fingers trembled. The shell was warm. She pressed it to her ear. And the voice inside whispered not a story but a question. Will you listen? The girl didn't answer right away. She just nodded very slowly. That night the wind changed. A merchant arrived, strange accent, shiny teeth, and gold coins that smelled like rot beneath the shine. He spoke too loud, smiled too much. Said he'd heard the tide would be rich this season. That the pearl moon was due again. Said he was looking for something rare. A girl with sea eyes. One who hears things others don't. The villagers stayed quiet. But some of them watched the girl. She saw their glances. Their unease. It started again. The whispers behind doors, the worry in her mother's voice, the weight of something old stirring beneath the water. But this time it would be different. She walked to the edge of the sea as clouds rolled in. The wind howled. The first drops of rain fell cold and fast. She took the shell in both hands. And whispered into it, I'm not afraid. The scream that came back wasn't pain. It was power. A sound that rippled through the stones beneath her feet, through the roots of the trees, through the bones of the old shrine. The wind stilled. The sky cracked open not with thunder but light. Pale and sharp and ancient. From the sea shadows began to rise. Not bodies. Not quite. Just forms, cloaked in salt, draped in seaweed, faces blurred like fog. Shell-bearers. Spirits of judgment. The girl didn't step back. She stood taller. The merchant, watching from the village, turned white as foam. The shells had woken. They moved across the shore like a tide with purpose. Not chaotic but deliberate. Ancient voices whispered from every titapool, every rock, every wave. Justice was awake again. And this time, it had not waited to be summoned. The girl dropped the shell onto the sand. It pulsed once. Then the others came, rising from the sea, buried in driftwood, tucked in forgotten corners. Dozens. Hundreds. Some cracked, some sharp, some dull, all alive. This was not a tale ending. This was the tale beginning again. And the village, wiser now, knew what it meant. The pearl tide had returned. But so had Marna, not in flesh but in memory, in shells, in every voice that had ever gone unheard. She was not one girl anymore. She was many. She was the scream in the dark that made wrong things shatter. The girl smiled. Not because she was safe, but because she was ready. Justice no longer slept beneath the waves. It walked the shore. And it listened. The fire crackles low. Its light dances on the walls of the small hut, flickering across rough wood, worn stone, and the folds of the old storyteller's robe. Outside, the wind sighs through tall grasses. The sea is only a whisper away, though you cannot see it from here, only hear it breathing like something ancient asleep beneath a blanket of stars. The storyteller leans forward, the shadows deep in their face. Eyes soft but shining. The room is silent, the kind of silence that lives in the bones, that hushes even the most restless children and makes grown men shift in their seats. And then they speak. There are two things the sea gives, they say, voice low. Pearls and shells. A few heads nod, though no one looks away. The children are wide-eyed. The elders just a little too still. Pearls, the storyteller continues, holding up two fingers, are what you take when you want to forget. They shine. They distract. They buy you comfort, bread, silence. But they come with a price. Pause. The fire spits. And shells? The voice softens now, almost a whisper. Shells are what you find when the sea wants you to remember. They hum. They echo. They hold pieces of voices that were never allowed to finish. A child near the front frowns slightly, lips parted. They hold stories, the storyteller says, that were buried too soon. They reach into their robe and slowly, carefully, place a single shell onto the ground before the fire. It's small. Nothing flashy, smooth, pale, with a slight curl and a worn edge. The kind of thing most would step over without a glance. But in this moment it feels like something more. They say the shell-bearer left pieces of herself in the sea. That her cloak broke apart as she walked into the tide. Each shell washed up where it was needed. Each one carried a story. The shell hums softly now. Just a note. Just enough. And sometimes, on the loneliest nights, if you hold one close enough. The child leans forward, hand outstretched. It'll speak. The storyteller's eyes do not blink. It will not tell you what you want to hear. But it will tell you what was forgotten. A hush. You see, they continue, voice fading into the wood smoke and wind. People try to bury what they don't want to carry. Hurt, guilt, truth. They think if they throw it far enough into the sea it won't come back. But the sea is a mother too. And mothers remember. A long silence falls. The kind that settles on skin and sinks in. The fire burns low now. Just embers and soft light. And the story ends, not with a cheer, not with a bow, but with the quiet knowledge that it has not truly ended at all. Far away, on a shore not far from where Marna once walked, a wave pulls back to reveal something small nestled in the sand. A child, running ahead of the others, spots it and stops. A shell. Smooth. Cool. A faint spiral traced by time. The child picks it up, brushing it off. Holds it to her ear. Listens. At first, there's only the sound of wind and tide. And then, a voice. Soft. Steady. Not frightening. Not loud. I was betrayed, it says. But I remember. And I wait. The child blinks. Looks out at the sea. No boats. No cloaks. No ghosts. Just the wind and the water and the knowing. She holds the shell tighter. She does not scream. She does not run. She listens. And the sea listens back. Somewhere in the hush of salt and dusk the tide shifts. And a new story begins.